Okay, welcome to another installment of Lessons in Leviticus. We're going to look today at Leviticus chapter 1. So if you would turn to Leviticus chapter 1 in your Bibles. I'm not going to read it to you, but I hope that you will actually read it as opposed to just listening to the teaching on it. But this whole chapter in Leviticus chapter 1 is about one type of the offerings regulated in the Bible, the burnt offering. And so, what I want to do is just share three things about the burnt offering to help us understand this chapter. And the first is this: the burnt offering was about forgiveness. So, verse 4 in Leviticus 1 says that it would be accepted to make atonement for the offerer. A sacrifice, this sacrifice was connected with receiving forgiveness from God. And as it says in verse 4, the offerer would lay his hand on the head of the animal, and the animal would be accepted for him to make atonement for him. So the animal being offered was accepted instead of the offerer to bring forgiveness for him or her. The animal died in the place of the offerer who had sinned. So the first part is the burnt offering was for forgiveness. Second, I want you to note, because there's three parts of this that are repeated almost word for word throughout chapter 1, but I want you to note that in each of those three sections, this is the second point here, is that the burnt offering is made available to everyone. So verse 3, that first section, is all about offering from the herd, a bull. The second section is all about offering from the flock, a sheep or a goat. And verse 14 then goes into offering birds. It's sort of a descending order of cost, a descending order of value, so that different people could participate regardless of what they could afford. You didn't have to give maybe a flat cost, because if you did that, it might feel like you were buying forgiveness. But this isn't about buying forgiveness. Rather, it taught everyone that everyone could participate and they needed to give what was costly for them. See, if you had more, you offered more. If you had less, you could still offer, you just offered less. See, if the law was you had to give a huge amount, then in order to show how costly forgiveness truly is, then that would exclude people who couldn't give that much. But on the flip side, if God had made it a really small amount so that the poorest among them could participate, then it wouldn't feel like it was very costly to the wealthy. But rather, each person was included and each person was expected to make a costly sacrifice. But the burnt offering was made available to everyone. It was about forgiveness, and it was available to all. And third, the burnt offering was costly. It was costly. So in 2 Samuel chapter 24, a different book of the Old Testament, King David once wanted to make an offering to God, a sacrifice to God. And someone else in the event wanted to sort of be generous to the king and give the king an animal that he could then sacrifice. And King David said, "No, I won't let you give it to me, but I'll buy it from you. Because," as he says, "I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing." See, worship is supposed to be costly. And in the burnt offering of Leviticus chapter 1, this is the most costly sacrifice. See, it had to be a perfect animal, one without any blemish, as it says. But also, the whole animal was burnt up. None of it got to be eaten. In other sacrifices, either the priest or the priest and the offerer got to eat part of the offering. But with the burnt offering, none of it was eaten. It was so costly that the entire animal was burned up as an offering to the Lord. And the offerer didn't get to keep any of it at all. The burnt offering was especially costly to make. You see, by offering a whole animal to God, the ancient Israelites and we are taught to acknowledge our sinfulness before the holiness of God, and His holiness is so great that only a full and costly ransom would be sufficient. That's why Jesus is spoken of, and His sacrifice on the cross is spoken of in the language of a burnt offering. Ephesians 5 verse 2 says, "Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave Himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." That's the pleasing aroma to the Lord of the burnt offering. Jesus' sacrifice of Himself on the cross is what the burnt offering of Leviticus 1 is all about. Now, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4 tells us that the blood of bulls and goats could never be sufficient to truly take away sin, but God accepted them temporarily so that they could point us to the sacrifice that Jesus would make for us on the cross. Jesus, the God-man, God incarnate, who was Himself without the blemish of sin. He was the perfect substitute accepted for us. He's the one who takes our sin upon Himself and takes the consequences of sin upon Himself. And He is the one who brings forgiveness through the cost of His own life. Jesus is the burnt offering that brings us atonement and forgiveness. So 2 thoughts briefly to leave you with to ponder today. 1, Jesus is our costly burnt offering. The whole system of the burnt offerings points to Jesus and His ultimate sacrifice for us on the cross to take away our sin. So read Leviticus chapter 1 again and think about, while you're reading it, think about Jesus as the one offered for us. Read it and consciously think of Jesus and His messy and complete sacrifice for you. And a second thought to ponder is that you and I are called to costly worship. Worship to God that is not easy or comfortable, but is costly. What will you offer to Jesus today, or this week, this month, that will cost you dearly to show your worship and faith and trust in Him? So that's all for today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.